I never imagined that a single sentence, said in passing, could unravel the life I thought I had carefully built. It started at a birthday dinner. My father's birthday, actually. The restaurant was loud, but I remember how quiet it got the moment my younger brother, Darren, leaned over to his girlfriend and said, "Well, you know my sister's not really part of the family." He laughed afterward, like it was a joke. But something about the way he said it made me freeze. I glanced at my dad, expecting him to chime in, maybe tell Darren to knock it off. Instead, he looked at his plate, like he had nothing to add. No defense. No denial. Just silence. I let it go in the moment, or at least I pretended to. Smiled through dessert. Made conversation. I even offered to pay for the drinks. But inside, I was unraveling. That one sentence, that laugh had hit something deep, something raw that I hadn't wanted to acknowledge for years. It wasn't the first time I'd felt different. I wasn't mistreated growing up, not in obvious ways. I had a room, clothes, a decent school. But there was always this invisible gap, like I was a guest in my own home. Darren got the better gifts. Darren's trophies were displayed front and center. Darren's mistakes were forgiven quickly, while mine echoed for weeks. I thought I was just overthinking it. But after that dinner, I couldn't stop thinking. And worse, I started remembering. That summer when I was 13 and overheard a late-night conversation between my parents. Something about not telling her, and it would just confuse things. At the time, I assumed they were talking about money. Or maybe a family secret that had nothing to do with me. Now, I wasn't so sure. So I did what any person would do when their reality starts to crack at the seams. I duck. I called my aunt, the only one who'd ever seemed a little too cautious around my parents. At first, she hesitated. But when I said Darren had let something slip, something about me not really being family, she went quiet for a long time. Then she sighed and said, "I knew this day would come." Those 7 words hit harder than anything Darren had said. And then came the truth, a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew about who I was and what I meant to the people who raised me. I wasn't their biological daughter. I wasn't even legally adopted. According to my aunt, I was the child of my mother's older sister, my actual birth mom, who had died in a car accident shortly after I was born. My father and stepmother, unable to have children at the time, agreed to raise me as their own. No paperwork. No legal guardianship. Just a private agreement within the family, one that was never meant to be revealed. But the worst part? They never planned to tell me. Ever. I sat in my apartment that night, the same apartment I'd worked 2 jobs to afford, shaking. Not because I was adopted, but because the people I'd called mom and dad had built our entire relationship on a lie and didn't even trust me enough to be honest about it. That moment, that was when the pain turned into something colder. Resolve. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I couldn't. I called in sick, though sick didn't even come close to describing how I felt. I was pacing my apartment, holding the phone in my hand, rereading old family photos on the wall like they were crime scene evidence. There was one in particular that stuck with me, a photo from my 10th birthday. Everyone was smiling, cake in front of me, my dad's hand resting awkwardly on my shoulder, like I was a neighbor's kid invited to the party. My stepmother was off to the side, holding Darren like a prize. And me? I had that smile kids wear when they're trying too hard to look happy. It hit me then. I had been living as a guest in my own life for decades. I needed answers, not half-truths. Not buried whispers passed through an ant like contraband. I needed to look into their faces and force the truth out of their mouths. So I drove straight to their house. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel the whole way there. My stomach was a pit of acid and adrenaline. When I pulled into their driveway, Darren's car was parked out front. Of course, the golden sun. Always around, always welcomed. I rang the doorbell. My stepmother opened the door. She gave me that rehearsed smile she always wore, the one that never reached her eyes. "Sweetheart, you didn't call. Everything okay?" I walked past her. No greeting. No small talk. I didn't come for warmth. My father was in the living room, watching something mindless on TV. I stood in front of it and said, "I want the truth. Now. No more dodging. No more pretending." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What are you talking about?" I repeated Darren's words. I repeated what my aunt told me. And when I saw the flicker of recognition in their eyes, the silence that dragged just a little too long, I knew. I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. My stepmother was the first to speak. "We were going to tell you. Someday." Someday. That word hit me like a slap. Someday. When? When I had kids of my own. When I buried them in the ground? When it no longer mattered? You lied to me, I said, barely able to control my voice. You made me think I was your daughter, that I was wanted, that I belonged. My father stood up finally, but he couldn't look me in the eye. You were loved. Loved? I spat. Loved people don't get lied to for 27 years. Darren came down the stairs at that point, probably hearing the commotion. He looked between us and said, You seriously still hung up on that joke? I turned to him and said, It wasn't a joke. It was the truth. You just let it slip. He shrugged. So what? You got a roof over your head, food, school. Why are you making this a big deal? It was like talking to a brick wall. No one in that house saw me. Not really. They saw a placeholder. A convenient child. A charity case dressed up as family. I left without another word. But I knew that day, things would never go back to the way they were. And I didn't want them to. Because now I was done pretending to. After that confrontation, I stayed away. I didn't answer texts, didn't check voicemails. I left the family group chat without a word. The silence that followed was louder than any screaming match we could have had. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because something about that day stuck with me, something about how my stepmother said, we were going to tell you someday. It wasn't just a defensive lie. It was almost rehearsed. And that's when I remembered the attic. My childhood home had a small attic space above the garage, a place I used to call my quiet castle when I was a kid. I would sneak up there with books and flashlights and daydream about being anywhere but in that house. I hadn't been up there in over a decade. So one Saturday morning, I drove back, not to see them, but for what they might have left behind. I waited until I knew they'd be out. They always went to the farmer's market on Saturdays like clockwork. I parked down the block, crept around the side gate, and used the spare key they still didn't know I had. The attic was exactly how I remembered it, dusty, cramped, filled with forgotten boxes and faded memories. But in one corner, buried under old Christmas lights and cracked photo frames, I found a small storage bin with my name written on the lid. Inside were things I hadn't seen in years, my old drawings, third-grade report cards, a broken snow globe, and at the very bottom, a sealed manila envelope labeled, not to be opened unless necessary. My hands were trembling again. Inside the envelope were letters. Dozens of them. Each one addressed to my biological mother. Some dated before I was even born. Others, just after. Letters my father had written but apparently never sent. Or maybe he had, and she never answered. The letters were haunting. In them, my father begged her to come back. He told her how lost he felt, how raising a child alone wasn't something he'd expected. Then the tone shifted. He started talking about my stepmother. How she offered to help. How she said she could fill the space. There was even one line that burned into my memory. She says if I give her a real family, she'll give me peace. She'll raise her as her own, no questions asked. Her. Me. He was writing about me. I wasn't a child they chose together. I was a bargain. A solution. And then, one final letter. No date. Just a single page written in my father's familiar script. We decided not to tell her. It's better this way. She doesn't need the weight of another abandonment. Let her believe this is her home, even if it never quite was. If you ever come looking, I'll protect her from that pain, even if it means lying for the rest of my life. I stared at that page for what felt like hours. They didn't lie to protect me. They lied to protect themselves from guilt, from discomfort, from ever having to answer the question, why wasn't I enough to love honestly? And as the sun slanted through the attic window, painting lines of gold across the dust-filled air, I realized something deeply painful and freeing. I was no longer their secret. Now, they were mine. After I read that last letter, I just sat there. Still. Hollow. Like my entire life had collapsed in on itself without a sound. I didn't cry. Not then. There were no tears left for people who had spent decades writing the story of my life in pencil, erasable, conditional, disposable. I folded the letters gently, put them back in the envelope, and walked out of that attic like I was stepping out of someone else's memory. And I left the front door wide open behind me. Let the truth flood the house if it wanted. Let it haunt them like it haunted me. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly, not really seeing the road, just letting the hum of the engine be the only thing louder than my thoughts. My phone buzzed twice, my stepmother, then my dad. I turned it off without checking. By the time I got back to my apartment, the envelope was still clutched in my hand like a relic. I placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it like it might explode. For a while, I just stood there. And then I made a decision. I scanned every letter, every page. Not to post online, not to expose, not yet. But because I needed to hold on to them in case they ever tried to twist the truth again. If they ever came knocking with crocodile tears and stories of how I misunderstood, I'd have the words they wrote, in their own handwriting, to throw back at them. That night, something strange happened. I slept. For the first time in weeks, I slept like a child. No nightmares, no waking up gasping from imagined confrontations. Just silence. Sweet, peaceful silence. It wasn't closure. Not yet. But it was something close. Over the next few days, I didn't reach out to anyone. I didn't tell my friends, didn't vent to my coworkers. I didn't run to social media. This pain, this truth, it was mine. Raw, heavy, sacred. And I wasn't ready to share it with anyone who hadn't earned a piece of it. But the silence didn't last long. Because 3 days later, my stepmother showed up. At my door. Holding cookies. Like it was 2001 and she was pretending to be someone's mother again. There she was, Dot. Standing in the hallway like a ghost draped in the costume of normalcy, Dot. Plastic smile, Dot. Freshly baked cookies in a Tupperware container, Dot. Like she was just popping by for a neighborly chat, not the woman who had erased me from my own family. I didn't say a word, Dot. Just stared, Dot. She cleared her throat and did that awkward motherly laugh, the one she used when she couldn't tell if I was about to cry or scream. I thought maybe we could talk, she said, holding out the container like a peace offering. I made your favorite. The peanut butter ones, remember? Remember? I almost laughed in her face. Remember the cookies? Not the lies? Not the letters? Not the years I spent believing I mattered? I didn't invite her in, Dot. I didn't even touch the cookies, Dot. I just leaned against the door frame and waited. She shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the silence. Your dad. He doesn't know I'm here, she admitted. He's struggling. I almost choked on the irony, Dot. He's struggling? Now that the fantasy's cracked and the puppet daughter cut the strings? I crossed my arms. Then why are you here? She looked at me like I'd hit her. We never meant to hurt you. Things were complicated. We had to think about everyone's future. There it was again. That word. Everyone. Like I was always just a footnote to someone else's story. I gestured toward the door. Take your cookies and go. Her eyes widened. You don't mean that. Oh, I said, voice steady. I absolutely do. She opened her mouth, but I was done. I stepped back and closed the door in her face, slowly, deliberately, Dot. She didn't knock again, Dot. She didn't leave the cookies. I stood behind that closed door for a long time, shaking, but not crying. Not this time. Because I realized something in that moment, something I should have realized years ago. She didn't come to apologize. She came to rewrite. To smooth over the cracks, sweep up the evidence, and go back to the performance. But I wasn't part of their play anymore. I had burned the script. Weeks passed. Not a word from either of them, Dot. I thought maybe, just maybe, the message had sunk in, Dot. That silence meant closure, Dot. But I should have known better. Because when silence ends in my family, it never comes gently, Dot. It arrives with legal stationery and golden embossed envelopes. The first letter came from a lawyer, Dot. An executor of my late grandfather's estate, Dot. I hadn't even known he'd passed. Inside was a polite paragraph explaining that he'd left me something in his will, a property, to be specific. His lakeside cabin. The only place I had good childhood memories. Where I used to go fishing with him. Where I felt seen. I clutched the letter like it was a lifeline, Dot. Until I saw the postscript. There will be a formal reading of the will. Family is expected to attend. Family. That word was starting to feel like a threat. A week later came the other letter, Dot. This one was handwritten from my father. Scrawled in his old, sharp, controlled handwriting, as if he thought he could command my forgiveness with a pen. We know things have been hard. Your mother and I regret how everything unfolded. Perhaps we could meet again at the lake house? We're hosting a family memorial after the will is read. It would mean a lot to us if you came. That us again. The us who chose to forget me. The us who lied for a decade. The us who wanted to sweep everything under the rug because it looked ugly in the family photo. And yet, the cabin wasn't theirs anymore, Dot. It was mine. I sat with the invitation for a long time, Dot. Turning it over, Dot. Reading it again, Dot. Tasting the weight of every hollow word. I didn't want to see them, but I wanted to see the cabin, Dot. My grandfather's memory deserved that. So I sent no reply. I packed a bag, Dot. And I made plans. Not to reconcile, but to reclaim. Because the past had stolen enough from me. Now it was my turn to show up uninvited and take back what was mine. The lake was exactly as I remembered it. Still, Dot. Cold, Dot. Quiet. like it was holding its breath. I parked my car just before sunset. The cabin stood tall on the slope, framed by golden trees and fading light. It should have felt comforting, but instead, it buzzed with ghosts. I didn't knock. I walked through the front door like I owned the place, because legally, I did. The living room was full. My father, my mother, a few cousins I'd barely recognized, and the lawyer. Every head turned when I entered, like someone had just dropped a bomb in the middle of a wake. My mother stood up. "You came." I said nothing. The lawyer cleared his throat, sensing the tension, and got to it quickly. He read out the details, line after line, dividing trinkets and heirlooms among relatives. Then he paused and looked directly at me. "To my granddaughter, I leave the cabin. She is the only one who visited me when everyone else forgot I existed. This place was her refuge, and now it's her inheritance." I felt my mother's breath catch beside me. My father's jaw clenched. The lawyer continued, handing me a small envelope. "He also left this for you. Private." Inside was a photo of the two of us sitting on the dock. I couldn't have been older than 10. On the back he had written, "You always showed up. Never stop." The room was quiet. No one spoke. But the tension was sharp, especially from my parents. They hadn't expected this. They thought the cabin would go to them. They thought I was just a guest. No, I was the rightful heir. My father spoke first, carefully. "This changes things. But we can work something out, Al." I cut him off. "There's nothing to work out. This is mine." He exchanged a glance with my mother. I saw the panic behind their eyes. Not sadness. Not regret. Panic over what they no longer controlled. My mother tried her turn. "Honey, we could use this place to reconnect. Maybe come together again as a family." "A family?" I scoffed. "You mean the one that deleted me for 10 years? She flinched, but I didn't stop. "I came to honor Grandpa, not to pretend we're something we're not." I stood. "The cabin is mine. You're welcome to leave." They didn't move at first. But I didn't need them to. I walked outside and left them sitting in the living room like strangers in a home they once claimed. It felt like closing a chapter. Not out of bitterness. But with clarity. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their apology. I had the truth, and the keys to something real. The first morning I woke up alone in the cabin, I cried. Not out of grief. Not even sadness. But relief. For the first time in years, I felt safe, in a space that belonged to me, where no one could twist my story or steal my worth. The floor creaked the same way it did when I was a kid running barefoot to the kitchen. The dock was still there, weathered but solid, like Grandpa had left it as a promise. I made coffee the old way, the way he taught me. Slow, deliberate, without rushing. I sat on the porch in his rocking chair and watched the mist lift off the lake. And for the first time, I could breathe. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I wasn't the unwanted granddaughter. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was the woman who survived betrayal, abandonment, and lies, and came out the other side not just whole, but stronger. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. From my mother. "We didn't mean to lose you. We just didn't know how to love you right." I folded it up and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd stopped needing closure from people who only offered it when they lost something. I had my own closure now. Grandpa gave me more than just a cabin. He gave me proof that I mattered, that I was seen, that love, the real kind, doesn't leave you at your lowest, it lifts you up. So I stayed. I fixed the place up. Turned it into a quiet retreat for other girls like me, ones who'd been pushed out, cast aside, told they weren't enough. Because they're. We all are. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't yelling. It isn't proving them wrong. It's building a life they can't access, a life of peace, purpose, and power. And every time I sit on that dock with the sun on my face, I know. I didn't lose a family. I found my freedom.